Who is piloting the UAPs or UFOs constantly seen in our skies? Where are they from? Why are they here? How long have they been here? What is their mission on planet Earth? Do they come in peace, or do they have more sinister motives? Join Mad Mark as he uncovers the answers to these questions and many more of the mysteries that puzzle us all on Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. And now, here's Mad Mark. Today's episode, a deep dive into the purpose and the secrets of the Great Pyramids of Giza. And we begin our discussion on the Pyramid Wars. Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of Who Are the Aliens? The history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. I'm Mad Mark, and before I begin, just a quick reminder to please like, share, and comment. It helps so much. I would also like to mention that I have created a new Facebook page just for the show. I've put a link in the show description, so go ahead and follow me over there. I'm hoping that this will become a place where we can all gather to discuss each episode and where you can voice your comments and questions, so please check that out. Today, we continue our studies of Zecharia Sitchin's third book, The Wars of Gods and Men, published by Avon Books in 1985. In episode 12, we began discussing the construction of the new Anunnaki spaceport in the Sinai Peninsula. This, of course, was necessary because the original spaceport in Sumer had been devastated by the Great Flood. We also discussed how Ninhursag, the half-sister of both Enlil and Enki, had been given rule over this new domain because she was seen as a neutral party by both clans. And then we began discussing how the Great Pyramids were built as the southernmost landmark for this new spaceport because there were no natural peaks to utilize in that area. But of course, I also acknowledge that these pyramids are so much more than mere landmarks. We may never know all the secrets of these great structures, but let's concentrate now on what the ancient texts will tell us about them. The entire Giza complex, the pyramids and the Sphinx, already existed before kingship was handed down to the pharaohs of Egypt. As we also discussed in episode 12, the land at that time was known as Kemet, from its earliest days up until around 700 BC, when it was conquered and renamed Egypt by the Greeks. However, I will continue to refer to it as Egypt because that is the name that everyone is familiar with. So, the three Great Pyramids of Egypt were designed and constructed by Enki and his son Ningishita, or Thoth. But the smaller pyramids in Giza, the ones that look primitive by comparison, the ones that are falling apart and crumbling, those structures were built by the pharaohs, not as tombs, but in an attempt to emulate the work done by the gods. For it was believed during the time of kingship that the Giza pyramids and the Sphinx were markers that showed the way to the stairway to heaven, the spaceport in the Sinai Peninsula. The endeavor to recreate these pyramids was the pharaoh's attempts to reach the stairway to heaven and journey to the afterlife. These lesser pyramids were often adorned with symbols, illustrations of the journey, and sometimes with quotations from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. While the three original pyramids, those built by Enki and Thoth, have shown incredible durability and bear no inscriptions or decorations whatsoever. Mr. Sitchin has theorized that the smaller third pyramid of Giza was erected first and used as a scale model for the other two, which were used to emulate the twin peaks of Mount Ararat to the north as the southernmost marker for the new spaceport in the Sinai Peninsula. Apart from its incomparable size, the Great Pyramid also includes a unique ascending passage, a level corridor, two upper chambers, and a series of narrow compartments. The uppermost chamber is reached via an incredibly elaborate grand gallery and an antechamber that could be easily sealed with one pull of a cord. The uppermost chamber contains an unusual hollowed-out stone block. This would have required amazing technology to build, and it rings like a bell. Above the chamber are the narrow series of low and rugged spaces which offer extreme resonance. There are many similarities between the Great Pyramid of Giza and the pre-diluvial Ker, or house which is like a mountain, the ziggurat belonging to Enlil in Nippur. Like the Great Pyramid, it too rose to a great height to dominate the surrounding plain. Prior to the flood, it was the home of the Anki, or the link of heaven and earth. It also served as the mission control center and was equipped with the tablets of destinies, or the orbital data panels, and the Ga, which was a mysterious dark chamber whose radiance guided the shuttlecrafts to landings at Sippar. But after the Great Flood, when Mesopotamia was finally re-inhabited, this ziggurat was no longer forbidden from entry by the humans. In fact, it became a place of worship because all space-related functions had shifted to the Sinai Peninsula, where, because of her neutrality, Ninhursag had been put in charge. There is a poem in the ancient texts which exalts Ninhursag as the mistress of the house with a pointed peak, or a pyramid. House bright and dark of heaven and earth, for the rocket ships put together. Ker, house of the gods with a pointed peak. For heaven and earth it is greatly equipped. House whose interior glows with a reddish light of heaven. A pulsating beam which reached far and wide. Its awesomeness touched the flesh. Awesome ziggurat, lofty mountain of mountains. Men cannot understand it. The function of the Great Pyramid is thus made clear. It was a house of equipment, serving to bring down to rest the astronauts who see and orbit. A great landmark for the lofty Shems. The text then goes on to describe other various parts of the pyramid. Its entrance, which opens and closes as a mouth, glowing in dim green light. The threshold, like a great dragon's mouth, opened in weight. The door jambs like two edges of a dagger that keeps enemies away. Its inner chamber is like a vulva guarded by daggers which dash from dawn till dusk. Its outpouring, that which it emits, is like a lion which no one dares attack. An ascending gallery is then described. Its vault is like a rainbow. The darkness ends there. In awesomeness it is draped. Its joints are like a vulture whose claws are ready to clasp. There at the top of the gallery is the entryway to the mountain's top. To foes it is not opened. Only to them who live, for them it is opened. 3 locking devices, the bolt, the bar, and the lock, slithering in awe-inspiring place, protected the way into the uppermost chamber, from which the Ker surveys heaven and earth. A net it spreads out. Now, these are amazing details, especially when compared to our present knowledge of the Great Pyramids. So, as I have already proven, we know that Ninhursag was given domain over the Sinai Peninsula and the Giza Plateau because she was a neutral party to both Enlil and Enki. But do the ancient Egyptian/Kemetic texts confirm this? Yes, they absolutely do. They knew her as Hathor. All temples and stelae erected by the Egyptian Kemetic pharaohs in the Sinai Peninsula were dedicated exclusively to this goddess, and Hathor too was nicknamed the Cow, the same nickname given to Ninhursag by the Sumerians. More evidence comes to us via an inscription by the pharaoh Khufu from circa 2600 BC, found on a commemorative stela that he erected at Giza in a temple dedicated to Isis. Known as the Inventory Stela, the monument and its inscription clearly prove that the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx already existed before Khufu's reign. The only thing that he claimed to have built was the temple to Isis beside the already existing Great Pyramid and Sphinx. The stela reads, "The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Kemet Khufu, life is given. He founded the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, beside the house of the Sphinx." The verse concludes with the phrase, "For his divine mother Isis, mistress of the western mountain of Hathor." But there is no doubt that the actual construction of the new spaceport in the Sinai, as well as the pyramids, fell into the hands of Enki and his descendants. Ninurta proved himself capable of damming and irrigation works. Utu Shamash knew how to command and operate the new spaceport facilities, and Ningishita Thoth was also greatly involved in all of this. How do we know that? Because he says so in his emerald tablets, which Mr. Sitchin was probably not aware of at the time that this book was written. But only Enki, the master engineer and scientist who had done all of this thousands of years earlier in Sumer, had the required know-how and experience to plan the massive construction works and supervise their execution. Marduk-Ra was also involved. How do we know this? Because Egyptian Kemetic texts connect Ra with the space facilities and related construction works. But an ancient Egyptian Kemetic tale concerning the pharaoh Khufu and his 3 sons reveals to us that in those days the secret plans of the Great Pyramid were in the custody of Thoth, the Egyptian Kemetic god of magical things, astronomy, mathematics, geometry, and land surveying. You will recall that earlier in this show, I mentioned that one of the unique features of the Great Pyramid was its upper chambers and passages. However, because these passages were sealed off, all of the pharaohs who attempted to emulate the Giza pyramids built theirs with lower chambers only, either because they lacked the architectural knowledge to recreate the upper chambers, or were simply unaware of their existence. But it seems that Khufu was indeed aware of the existence of these passages, and at one point he was on the verge of discovering the plans for their construction, because he was told where the god Thoth had hidden them. Written on the Westkar papyrus and titled Tales of the Magicians, the tale relates how Khufu called for a meeting with his 3 sons, asking them to tell him the tales of the deeds of the magicians of the olden times. Khafra, the oldest son and heir to the throne, spoke first. He told of events that had happened in the days of Khufu's forefather in the temple of Ptah Enki. To make a long story short, the second oldest son spoke next, and finally it was time for the youngest son to speak. And his tale turned out to be the most interesting one of all. He spoke of a man he knew named Didai, who knew the Pudut numbers of the chambers of Thoth. Hearing this, Khufu became extremely curious, for he had long been searching for the secret of the chambers of Thoth in the Great Pyramid, which were already blocked and hidden by Khufu's time. So he ordered that Didai be found and brought to his abode. Once there, Didai explained that, "I know not the information in the designs, O king, but I know where the plans with numbers were hidden by Thoth. There is a box of whetstone in the sacred chamber called the chart room in Heliopolis, and they are in that box." So Khufu ordered Didai to go and find the box for him. But Didai replied that it was neither he nor Khufu who could obtain the box. It was destined to be opened only by a future descendant of Khufu's, and that decree had been made by none other than Marduk-Ra himself. So, yielding to the will of Ra, Khufu ended up only building a smaller temple to the mistress of the pyramid near the Sphinx, as I stated earlier. So the circle of evidence is complete. Sumerian and Egyptian Kemetic texts confirm each other regarding the pyramids and Ninhursag, But the Anunnaki's desire to keep the Sinai Peninsula and its facilities neutral did not last for long. Rivalry and love tragically combined to upset the status quo, and the divided earth was soon embroiled in the Pyramid Wars. But before we get into that topic, one that we have all been waiting for ever so patiently, allow me to sidetrack for just a moment to talk about Dr. Zahi Hawass. Many of you might know that name. He's an archaeologist and the former minister of tourism and antiquities in Egypt. I first heard of him in the 90s on the old Coast to Coast AM radio show hosted by Art Bell. At first, he seemed like a cool guy, always talking about the history of ancient Egypt and about different artifacts that they were finding there. Now remember, in the mid-90s, I was still in the beginning to middle stages of learning about the Anunnaki. I had only read a few of Zecharia Sitchin's books by then, and really nobody else on the planet was talking about this topic like they are now. So I really didn't know much about Egypt and the pyramids then, and I found the topic to be truly fascinating. As time went by, I started seeing Zahi Hawass on various documentaries, and I still found him to be an interesting person. But then I started noticing a change in him, just a little at first, but then more and more often, he began displaying the behaviors of someone who was not actually interested in the true history of Egypt, which I found insane because I always thought that archaeologists were supposed to be honest in their mission to discover the truth about the past. But it began to feel as though someone had gotten to him. He was suddenly more interested in maintaining old norms and the status quo than discovering new truths. So I lost interest in him, and as I read more and more of Sitchin's work, Zahi Hawass just more or less dropped off of my radar. But looking back at it now, some things just don't add up. Are you telling me that as the former minister of antiquities in Egypt, he was unaware of this same information regarding the ancient Sumerian and Egyptian Kemetic texts as Mr. Sitchin? He had to be aware of everything that I have been discussing on this show, and yet he continually maintains that the pharaohs built the pyramids. Someone has gotten to him, told him to keep his mouth shut or else. Someone who doesn't want this truth to get out or at least become mainstream knowledge. I wonder who that could be. Possibly the same entities who are really running this planet? The same entities that have been covering up this truth for centuries? And here's another thing that rubs me the wrong way. Remember on my last episode when I told you the truth about ancient Egypt? How it was originally named Kemet and held that name for thousands of years until the Greeks conquered them and changed it to Egypt around 600 to 700 BC? And how it was a great and powerful civilization inhabited by black people? Well, evidently Zahi Hawass is now trying to refute that claim as well. I came across an article in the Egyptian Gazette from 2023 where it basically claims that he not only refutes this truth, but is also proud to do so. I have news for you, Mr. Hawass. All you have to do is Google it. Around 1000 BC, Kemet's power began to decline, and after roughly 2,000 years of domination, it was finally conquered by first the Persians, then the Greeks, who, as I mentioned, renamed it Egypt, then the Romans, and so on and so on. In the year 640 AD, Arab Muslim forces conquered Egypt and thus established Islamic rule. And although it did change hands a few more times after that, the Arab Islamic influence is still dominant there to this day. But that was roughly 1,000 years after Kemet was first conquered. So I'm sorry, Mr. Hawass, your story just doesn't add up. And, in my opinion, you should go back to being a truth seeker like you were in the 90s and stop covering up for these people or entities that don't want this truth to be exposed. Okay, and now, on to what we've all been waiting for, as promised, the Pyramid Wars. Now, as with all disputes concerning the Anunnaki, these wars centered around the clans of Enlil and Enki. But it's mainly their children who had the largest roles in these pyramid wars, although Enki had a much bigger role than Enlil did. But since these battles mostly involved their kids, it does get a bit confusing because these two half-brothers produced a lot of offspring when you consider the sexual relations they had in those days with wives, consorts, and concubines. So try to bear with me here, and I will try to relate this information as clearly as I can. We briefly touched on the first pyramid war back in episode 11, and it is an event inscribed on the temple walls in the ancient Egyptian city of Edfu. And it is a tale whose roots, as always, can be traced back to the never-ending struggle for control over Earth and the spaceports by these two Anunnaki clans, and the shenanigans of Enki Ptah and his son Marduk Ra. So, after ruling Egypt Kemet for 9,000 years, Ptah Enki handed it down to his son Marduk Ra. But Marduk Ra's reign was cut short after only 1,000 years by the deluge, or Great Flood, as we have already discussed. Then came the reign of Marduk Ra's son Shu, who ruled for 700 years and helped his father control the skies over Earth. That was followed by the reign of Shu's son Jeb, Enki's great-grandson, who ruled for 500 years. And it was during that time, circa 10,000 BC, that the new spaceport in the Sinai Peninsula and the Pyramids of Giza were constructed. As we already discussed, these areas were supposed to remain neutral territory under the rule of Ninhursag, but it is doubtful that the builders of these facilities, namely Enki and his descendants, ever had any real intentions of relinquishing control over them. Another aspect of all this, which was covered briefly on an earlier episode, was how Enki had repeated sexual relations with his half-sister Ninhursag in an attempt to produce a male offspring that would usurp the kingship inheritance of Nibiru from Enlil's clan over to Enki's. A Sumerian text known as the Paradise Myth is a record of politically motivated lovemaking between Enki and Ninhursag in order to produce a male heir, which would not only accomplish that task, but also guarantee control over the new spaceport and the pyramids well into the future. The tale concerning this tryst between Enki and Ninhursag took place shortly after the Earth was apportioned, with Enki's clan getting Egypt among other places, and Ninhursag being given rule over the spaceport facilities in the Sinai Peninsula. And it was then, the story relates, that Enki crossed the marshy lakes that separated Egypt from the Sinai and came unto lonely Ninhursag for an orgy of lovemaking. When this coupling resulted in a female child, Enki waited for the girl to mature before having sex with her as well, and then, likewise, from the daughter who was born from that attempt. This all happened over many years, to be sure, but in total, it ended up producing 8 Anunnaki offspring fathered by Enki, 6 females and 2 males. And eventually these children grew up and demanded territories of their own. Now, if you think these sexual exploits by Enki were confusing and caused even more rivalries to be created, let's not forget the sexual shenanigans by Marduk Ra, Enki's son. And the most significant of these was the assertion that Osiris was actually his son and not the son of Marduk Ra's grandson Jeb. Are we getting confused yet? It's all like trying to keep track of the goings-on in a Nevada whorehouse, isn't it? The rumor was that Marduk Ra had sex with his own granddaughter, and this, as it turns out, was the central conflict between Osiris and Set. One has to ask at this point if the Anunnaki even had whorehouses. Was that a thing back then? I mean, if not, somebody missed a great opportunity to make a lot of money. If such a place had existed back then, I believe that the owner would have become a very rich man indeed. Sorry, just an observation there. Okay, back to the story. So, Jeb, Enki's grandson, ruled Egypt for 500 years, as we mentioned earlier. When his sons came of age, Jeb granted Seth the territory of Upper Egypt, and to Osiris he gave Lower Egypt. To understand this, let's look at a map, because it is exactly the opposite of how it sounds. As you can see here, Upper Egypt is actually at the bottom of the country, and Lower Egypt is at the top. This is determined by the current of the Nile River, which flows from south to the north. But why was Seth upset with being granted Upper Egypt? And why did he covet Osiris's Lower Egypt so badly? Badly enough, in fact, to go to war over it. Well, it's really not that hard to understand. Lower Egypt contained the pyramids in Giza, and whoever controlled them also shared control of the activities at the spaceport in the Sinai, the comings and goings of the gods on and off of planet Earth, the vital supply link to and from planet Nibiru. So, once Seth murdered Osiris over this, Osiris's son Horus took up the fight for his father and went to war against Set. And, with the help of Marduk, Ra, and Thoth, among others, as we discussed in an earlier episode, Horus defeated Set rather easily, and that was actually the story of Pyramid War number 1. So at that point, Horus was awarded the entire country of Egypt to rule over. And what happened to Set? Besides, of course, losing his testicles in one of the battles of this war, and yes, that really did happen. And, as if that wasn't bad enough, he was banished from Egypt and took up abode in a land to the east, a land known as Canaan. And that leads us to the story of the Second Pyramid War. And this one is far nastier. And I'm going to examine it in great detail in the next episode of this show. But for now, how about a little teaser? After the deluge, in addition to a new spaceport, the Anunnaki also needed a new mission control center to replace the damaged one that had been in Nippur. And the site chosen for this new location? None other than Mount Moriah. And where exactly is Mount Moriah, you may ask? Right outside the city of Jerusalem. And that is where I leave you for this episode. You have quite a lot to digest there, and we have so much more to cover and learn. I'm Mad Mark, and I sincerely hope that you have enjoyed this episode. If so, please like, share, and comment. I can't tell you how much that helps. And also tell your friends and help spread the word about this show. Also, if you have any questions regarding any of the content discussed on this program, just message me through madmarktv.com or on any of my social media platforms. I also wish to remind everyone that listening to this podcast is no excuse to not read the book that we are discussing here, The Wars of Gods and Men by Zecharia Sitchin. It is an amazing work, and I'm leaving out much of the information in order to keep the podcast flowing properly. So do yourselves a favor and read that book. Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth is written and produced by me, Mad Mark. Today we have taken yet another step in our ongoing journey to discover the truth. I promise you that things will get more and more interesting the further we delve into this topic of who are the aliens, the history of the Anunnaki on planet Earth. Bye for now. You've been listening to Who Are the Aliens? The History of the Anunnaki on Planet Earth with your host, Mad Mark. Join us again on our next program when Mad Mark will once again uncover the answers to the mysteries that puzzle mankind.